Macro photography is awesome because it draws you in and makes you look at the world with a completely different perspective. It makes you slow down and get up close, like literally pay attention to every detail. It's almost like it's slowing down time, and I haven't met one person out there yet that doesn't like macro photography. So in this video, I'm just gonna give you a general overview and talk about what you need and how you can start practicing and getting better at capturing those little details that are in everyday life. Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Charles Wollertz. This is Wollertz Photography, and today we're talking macro photography. What do you need to start in macro photography? Well, there's a whole bunch of things you're gonna need, and they vary in prices. So you can start with extension tubes, something like this. They're like 40 bucks, and they'll make any lens that you own a macro lens. And to be honest, this is what I recommend. A proper macro lens like this one is gonna cost you well over $1,000. Extension tubes, 45 bucks, and you can make any lens that you have a macro lens. What is a macro lens? Every lens has a minimum focusing distance. This allows you to get close to your subject. So if you're shooting with a wide angle, you can get maybe a foot away from your subject. That's not enough to get those details that you want. So by adding extension tubes, you'll be able to get like 2 or 3 inches away from your subject. And now you're filling the frame with that subject, getting in all that detail. Now, these are not just for macro. I know a lot of people that use them just so they can get closer to, let's say, food photography. You have a wide angle, you want to get up close, but your camera won't focus. Throw one of these on there and you'll be able to get much closer. The other option out there, probably the least expensive one, is something like this, a reverse ring. This goes on the front of your lens. You put your lens on backwards on your camera, and now that lens is gonna, all the optics are inversed. That's gonna change completely how you can focus and how close you can get to your subject. It's not as easy to use because it makes the lens a completely manual lens. You can't really zoom in and out. Your focus has to be done manually, so it tends to be a little complicated, but you can get some great photos. And then of course there's the macro lens, a proper macro lens. Like I said, they're a little bit more expensive, and there's a price range. I mean, they're all over the place. Usually 100 millimeter is a great way to start. This is a 180. Then there's something like this. This is a macro probe lens. This is a Laowa wide angle. It's a 24 millimeter where I can get up to like a ½ an inch close to the lens. So it is a really cool perspective when you're shooting food, when you're shooting insects or plants or mushrooms or anything that you're shooting. It's just really cool to be able to get that close with a wide angle. Remember, wide angles are going to show more of the scene, so you can make like a macro environment shot. So you focus in the detail, yet you're showing everything that's around it. But a lens like this has its limitations. It needs a lot of light because it starts at an f14 and goes up to f40. So you're not going to be hand holding any images from that lens. And if you're doing video, you're going to need a lot of light, which is the next thing you need when you're doing macro, is a solid tripod. Even a 180 millimeter like this is an f3.5. When you get close to your subject, you need a lot more light. So a solid tripod where you can get away with slower shutter speeds are really going to help. Lights, lume cubes, LED lights, anything like this that's going to help you illuminate your subject and get a better shot. A flash, that would really help too. That way you can freeze your subject. You can see how there's a whole bunch of things that you can use or will use if you get into macro photography, especially when you do things like this, like live creatures, live things, live insects. These are moving very fast. Now, no, before I forget, there's also focusing rails for macro. This is something where you set your camera, set the exposure, set everything, and take multiple shots. So you do one picture at one distance, you get a little bit closer, take another photo, then a little bit closer and do another photo. And this way you get the focus all the way across. Then you take those photos into Photoshop and do a photo stacking. And then that'll combine all the different focus points and give you a super sharp image. And people do this because there's a big difference with shooting at f3.5 or at f14, not only on your subject but also the background. So sometimes you want that background completely blurred, and the only way to get that is at 3.5. If you shoot at f13, that background is going to show a different type of bokeh, which it might not be what you want. So by blending the images, you'll get the detail at f13 with the blur background out of an f3 or f2 or 1.4, whatever. That's why we blend images, is to get that detail with the blur. Camera settings, oh man, so there's no real specific camera settings for macro. This totally depends on your subject and what you are shooting with. For example, if I'm shooting with this lens and I'm shooting a live insect, the best thing to do is to have a couple of speed lights that are gonna freeze the subject with the light. If I don't have a light and I'm using natural light, then I can do two things. I can set the camera on shutter priority, which is a TV mode on your camera, and then choose a shutter speed that's fast enough to freeze the subject and avoid motion blur. The other thing I can do if I have a tripod is set it to aperture priority and choose an aperture that's going to give me that depth so that I can get the photo that I want, but also try to match the shutter speed and the ISO so that that subject is going to look as best as possible. That's what I use for some of these photos. Because it's flat, I used an aperture of like f11. That gives me more detail, but because it's on a white background, that's just blurred. So it works out fairly well. If you're shooting a live insect like a bee on a flower, then you need a fast enough shutter speed to freeze the action. So again, don't be afraid of pumping your ISO up to 1000 or 2000 in direct sunlight, because you're gonna need those fast shutter speeds. Hands down, the biggest challenges with macro photography is your light, the lack of light, how much light you need when you're freezing something, and the depth of field. These are like the biggest things out there. So remember, stacking images is really gonna help, and also adding light, bringing in flashes, speed lights, anything like this is going to help you freeze that subject and give you that depth of a live insect. You're not going to be able to stack images of a live spider or a live bee or anything like that. You need something that's holding still so you can change the focus in different intervals. Modern mirrorless cameras like the Canon R5, and there's a few other ones, Sony does this, and I think Nikon does it as well. Not all of them, but some of them have stacking on camera. So I can set this camera to take 100 photos at different increments in the focus plane. So I can do it all on camera and not have to worry about changing a focusing rail. So check your camera, you might have that feature. I know my Canon R5 does, but not every camera has something like that. That's why they have the focusing rail, which are like 60 bucks. If you're interested in macro, this is, to me, one of the best things out there. To be able to do a stack like that is really cool, and it gives you the most detail out of your photo. Freezing motion, freezing a water drop, that's a whole nother technique, and for that you definitely need flashes. You can do concepts, you can do a whole bunch of different things, and I think I'll be making a video here in the future with something like this, because I really like the technique, and I think it could be, if you had a concept, you could use it for stock photography as well. I have a lot of images of macro that I sell for stock, whether it's rocks, plants, animals, and Bambi's nose. There's a lot of photos that do very well. This was the top of a Guinness with a shamrock, tiny, just as a background, and this was one of my best sellers as a macro photo. They do very well. Food, I mean, there's so many things you can photograph with the macro lens that makes you go in and look at things a little bit differently. Being patient is probably one of the biggest things when it comes to macro photography. Remember, you're slowing down time, you're getting up close, you're looking at all those flowers inside of a water drop, which is another cool technique. That one I like. So being patient, because not every photo is going to look the same. When you're trying to capture water drops, you're going to take hundreds of images in one day, and you might end up with 3 or 4 that are really good. This is practice, this is patience, which is why I recommend doing stock photography. Your practice shots, your B-roll, when you're learning how to use your equipment, upload those images to stock agencies. You might be surprised by how much money you can make. I've had pretty good results with macro images, textures, the flowers, the leaves on the petals on a flower, like that was a cactus flower. The water drop on a plant. I mean, the details that you can capture with macro are just incredible. And in my experience, things like that tend to sell for stock photography. There's also filters that go on the front of your lens that act as a magnifying glass. I don't like putting filters in front of my lenses because every time you add something to that front element, it's going to reduce the clarity of that glass. But if you want to get started in macro photography, something like that is fairly inexpensive. I think they're like $100, and you can get some pretty cool shots. Now, like I said, extension tubes, if you've never shot macro before, I would recommend extension tubes. They can turn any of your lenses to a macro lens by changing that focusing distance. By changing that distance between your sensor and your lens is going to allow you to focus closely. And I mean, look at some of these textures, some of the detail in that flower. I hope you understand a little bit about macro photography with this overview. There's so many ways you can practice it. There's no real secret to what kind of shutter speed or aperture or anything like this. It's all practice. It's fun. I have a few videos on macro photography here on the channel, so if you're interested in this, consider subscribing. Give this video the thumbs up if you found anything of value, and don't forget to hit the bell because apparently that is very important. I will be making a few more tutorials, maybe freezing the water drop, finding the right moment to get the match on fire, different things like this that was really fun to play around with. And I think those images would do very well as stock photos. So if you're interested in stock photography, I have a whole bunch of videos here on the channel on that subject. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.